Welcome to the broadcast, everybody. Some really grotty revelations have emerged today in the wake of the serialization of Robert Jobson's new book, Our King. And he does have a few connections to royalty. So he's come up with a few interesting insights into what's been going on behind the scenes with regards to the relationship between Catherine and Meghan and Charles, William and Harold. So we will be delving into that in just a moment. But for levity, I will start with this comment I received earlier today from Angela Meyer, who said we need to discuss the hideous AI photos, that's artificial intelligence, for those of you who are rather Philistine like me and don't know about these things in the modern world. These AI photos that have come out recently of the Princess of Wales and Nutmeg together. Well, I hadn't heard about these AI photographs, so I got a googly fingery and I discovered them. And they did make me chuckle. You can let me know how realistic they actually are. This first one shows them in silky casuals, looking sisterly, with Meghan clutching her sissy-in-law in a warm embrace. Oh, it's an effrontery to the eyes, isn't it, my dear? Keep your hands off our fair Catherine, my dear. The second one I thought was positively sapphic. Actually, a lot of these photographs have got a sapphic element to them. Taking a trip to the Isle of Lesbos, my dear. Very sapphic as their hair. Their locks are intertwined in a lover's knot. A new kind of tiara, my dear, in their crisp white shirts. Meghan patting Catherine's abdomen. And Catherine rests a hand on Meghan's inner thigh, and that was the worst thing for me to see. And that certainly proves that there's nothing genuine about that photograph, as if that royal hand would deign to broach that enclave. No. The next one is conspiratorial in tone. Catherine shares a fond whisper, perhaps about bedroom antics, regarding Grand Willie and petty hairs, comparing the two and having a bit of a giggle. Don't spill too many beans, Katie dear. Don't spill them, because they'll end up appearing in the Netflix sequel, won't they? In the next photograph, Catherine is wistful. She's under the protective care of the arched back of Meghan's dominant attitude. And here we see the confronting, dynastical, uncompromising glare of assured royalty, at least from Catherine. One of them's clad in green, and one of them is green with envy, my dear. And finally, on the piece, with snowdrifty smiles and woolly bobbled hats, the mood is royal, carefree, and al fresco. And I suppose it points to what could have been, couldn't it, my dear? We could have had another Fergie and Dutch on our hands. Well, perhaps not, because they were always falling in and out of favour with each other anyway, weren't they? But could have had a wonderful thing going on there. And we cannot hold Catherine responsible for that fallout whatsoever, because it's all down to the Harkles and their selfish, egotistical behaviour. And we've been seeing more evidence of that in this serialisation of Robert Johnson's, I always call him Johnson, Robert Jobson's new book, Our King, which is being serialised. He also is the journalist, he does have some form because he got the scoop of the royal engagement between Charles and Camilla. So he did well for that. He's got contacts. And one of his revelations is that sources close to the royal family confirmed to Robert Jobson that the show of unity you saw after the death of the late Queen Elizabeth, when they went on walkie-walkies into the crowd, remember? Everyone gasped in horror. It was an illusion. That show of unity was an illusion. A fantasy. Catherine admitted, he says, to a senior royal. And before I progress, I will caveat this with a legal disclaimer. What I discuss in this broadcast is in relation to the serialisation and Robert Jobson's claims. They are not my claims. For legal reasons, I will declare that. That is what I am discussing here. The show of unity was an illusion. Catherine admitted to a senior royal that such was the ill feeling between the couples that this joint walkabout was one of the hardest things she ever had to do. Try working a double shift on a supermarket checkout, love, to be fair. But yes, in Catherine's world, it was one of the hardest things she'd ever had to do because of the ill feeling between them. And you know her, most of us could sense it at the time. And if you watch it back and look at the photographs, it is there, plain to see, plain for the world to see. It was very difficult for the girl. But guess what? William took that decision and Catherine supported him because he knows that that is what his grandmother would have wanted. He knows that a show of familial unity was the mature step to take and the olive branch to offer. And Catherine, because she supports her husband and his role as well as the man, which is something Meghan never understood, never was able to do. Not that I pass all the blame to her, because Harry wanted it. He wanted an excuse to run and behave like a selfish ogre. Yes, he did. Yes, he did. He was looking for that excuse, and Robert Jobson backs this up with his findings too. One could see and feel Catherine's discomfiture. And bear in mind that this is before Spare was released, when the boy had the temerity to release Spare into the world. That diatribe of fiction. This was before he and Meghan were holding that information that he was about to disparage Harold and Papa. That darling boy, that darling boy, was holding all the cards behind the scenes, wasn't he? Even in the wake of the late Queen's death. No wonder there was tension and an undercurrent, and that has been confirmed. Robert Jobson says confirmed by a senior royal. Place your bets, my dear, place your bets. Who it might have been. Robert Jobson says that even Queen Elizabeth eventually tired of Harry's outbursts. She wearied of his volatile exchanges with other members of his family in her presence, as he confirmed himself in Harry's own book. She was mystified by his behaviour, mystified by it, and described it as quite mad. Quite mad. And it's not the first time that the word mad has come up in association with Harry, especially as we all know that he surrounds himself in a world full of mind-altering substances, by his own account. Mind-altering psychedelics. And, oh, the wacky-backy, yeah, man, far out and groovy. Gonna discover myself on my gap year. I'm gonna take a gap year to Kenya. Let's get all bohemian, just like the Duke of Windsor, my dear. Yes, my dear. We all know his drug of choice is Meghan Markle. She outranks every other drug that's been hoovered and vacuumed up those peppered nostrils. Elizabeth also came to believe that Prince Harry was so consumed by love that it was clouding his judgment. Yes, Harry plagued the Queen with phone calls. Plagued her, says Jobson. Granny, put me through to Granny, no. I need to speak to her. They are not letting me get through to they are stopping me. They are preventing me get through to her. I need to go and check because I'm the one that she trusts. We've got a really close relationship, as he kept telling everybody. We are really close. And they are blocking me from getting through to Granny. She needs to see me. She's demented. She's gaga. She's old. No, my dear, she was switched on till her very last breath. There was mental agility, more mental fitness than anything that's been going on in your grey matter. Since you were prepubescent, no doubt. More going on there with the late Elizabeth, my dear. You plagued her with calls. And it troubled the Queen. He tried to air his grievances. She didn't want to hear it because she is from that never complain, never explain cool. And she was like, here he goes again. Okay, Harry. Will you speak to your father, dear? Speak to your father. She didn't want to know. She's got a country to head up. She's got a Commonwealth. She's head of state for 6,000 countries. Queen of Canada. Queen of Barbados, as she was. Queen of New Zealand. Queen of the fucking world. Queen of Tuvalu. Queen, 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 queen. She had things to do.
But I need to talk about it, Granny. I need to talk about it.
No, you don't. That's what you don't seem to realise, Harold. You don't need to talk about it. You need to shut up and get on with your life. Your privileged life. Couldn't get it through to that skull. Couldn't get it through. Well, she asked him to speak directly to his father. She was turtling, as Megan calls it. No, she was ostriching, actually, my dear. Her Majesty found Prince Harry's calls quite difficult and wearisome. She didn't want to interfere in the father-son relationship and would urge him to speak to his father. You know, he was actually the one that thought that she was losing her faculties, losing her mind, just because she was old, when she was actually completely and utterly sharp. He is actually the one that thought, well, Daddy's not listening to me. He won't do what I say, so I'll just coerce Granny. I'll just cut out the middleman and go straight to Granny. Really? You really thought that ploy would work? Just because she loved you so? You thought that you would take advantage of that chink in her armour? But actually, the book tells us that Charles stopped talking to Harry after Harry swore at him, at our future king, swore at him and repeatedly asked for funds. More funds, more funds, more money, more money. If you don't, then I'm going to have to sell my story and go on Netflix. The Queen asked Charles why he hadn't given in to Harry, and Charles told her, I'm not a bank. Ain't you ever heard of the Bank of Mum and Dad, my dear? It's very popular with the young ones these days. The Bank of Mum and Dad. It ain't Coots. It ain't Coots, my dear, but it's a bank all the same. And Harry wanted to start an account. In 2016, that was the moment when Harry released his formal statement protecting his girl. Yeah, I'm so alpha. I'm stepping in from beta to alpha, and I gotta protect my girl. I'm so sexy. This statement described a wave of abuse and harassment, and he was involved in nightly legal battles to silence defamatory stories. That seemed to set a precedent for the future, didn't it, my dears? All these legal battles. He had consulted neither Charles or William, and I wouldn't be surprised, you know, if that statement that he so hurriedly released, protecting his girl, I wouldn't be surprised if that was already pre-written and pre-arranged before the relationship even became public and was exposed. Because he was champing at the bit to get it out there, wasn't he? Champing at the bit to make a defence. Just as she always knew that she'd end up back in California or Hollywood. Just as she always knew that, he always knew that he was going to play out his fantasy of replaying his mother's life and living via Meghan, the reincarnation of Diana. The living reincarnation of Diana. You know, he wants to play out rescuing her as he couldn't rescue his mummy. And it seems like that was already in his head from the get-go and before the get-go. But when he released that statement, his papa was given 20 minutes notice. 20 minutes. Really. You know, this guy who talks about the honour that he has for the senior members of his family, 20 minutes notice. And at that very moment, Charles had just arrived in Bahrain. Just arrived there on a Foreign Office-sponsored visit to the Gulf states. Good timing, huh? So all the attention switched. And Harold would have known this very well. He knows how it plays out. He knows when a senior member of the royal family is doing something like that, you don't try and upstage them. Well, he did. Well, he did with 20 minutes notice. And the book tells us that Charles at this moment felt that that was bad form. Very bad manners. It was, you know, such a usurping of superiority and hierarchy that he knew in that moment, if he didn't already know. He knew that Harry was no good egg, didn't play fair, and it wasn't cricket, my dear. Bad form. Bad form. Now, William's reaction to that statement was to say that Harry had overreacted. He thought it was an extreme overreaction, and it wasn't timely. But as Henry later explains, the difference here between disparaging all the other members of the royal family and my wife-to-be, the difference here is the race element. No, we're not buying it. No, we're not buying it, dear. The difference wasn't the race element. And you know it. And I remember seeing him say that in an interview. And I could see this sort of shift in his face. It was almost like a Diana expression that she would do in the Panorama interview. A Spencer trait. And it's almost a sort of body language giveaway of when they're perhaps embellishing, fictionalizing, or knowingly not quite coming out with an exact rendition of what really took place. Even when they did go on that walkabout after the Queen's death, the crowds received Meghan rapturously. It was hugs and embraces, warmth from the crowds. To my chagrin, I wanted a few feelings to be made known, but it was the British way. They were extremely nice to her, as the crowds had always been within this nation. And any elements of racism were trace, as they say, were trace. And so I believe that William was right, as were most of the British public of all colours that read that statement that day and thought, oh, shut up. We learned from Robert Jobson that when Queen Elizabeth met Meghan Markle for the first time and had tea, she didn't realise that Meghan was mixed race. Well, go figure. The Queen told a member of her close circle that she simply hadn't been told. The Queen suggested the Countess of Wessex as an advisor and mentor, because Sophie would have been able to impart her experience and her knowledge. But Meghan said, thanks, but no thanks, that's really kind. Robert Jobson says that she said basically words to the effect of, I've got Harry, why do I need anyone else to show me the ropes? No, not Susan Hussey, no, not Sophie Wessex, I want to show them how it's done my way. And the Toronto way, no disparagement to Toronto, dears, you know what I'm talking about, the Toronto Hollywood world of the starlet kind of way. You know, I'm used to running the show, the TIG, and I've worked at the Argentinian embassy. I worked in politics. So I'm going to show them how it's done. No, my dear. Behind the scenes, William knew that Harold was desperate. It was desperado time. He'd been fooling around, fumbling around with Sasha Walpole in fields, Cressy bonbons, you know, all these things coming absolutely nowhere. Who was the other one? Cressy bonbons. What was the other one? They all begin with C, don't they? Oh yes, Chelsea. Chelsea Davy! All the Chelseas and the bonbons and the older ladies and the farmhands, the grooms, all going nowhere. So he was desperate for the family. And William said, are you sure, Harold? Are you sure? What? Racist. No, he wasn't being a racist for asking if you're sure. He was being sensible because you'd brought this madam into proceedings who thought that she knew how to run the show, who upset Catherine by asking about her hormones. Baby brain, she's got baby brain. All these kinds of awkwardness going on behind the scenes. Charles dropped a bombshell saying that he couldn't afford to pay for Meghan. You know, he couldn't afford to pay for Meghan because I've got Camilla, William, Catherine and their family to pay for, and mine, and all the palaces. I can't afford Meghan as well. I've got to admit, that is a little bit hard to believe, isn't it? Can afford all the glories in the world, all the money pouring in from the duchies, but I draw the line at Meghan, dear. One shouldn't laugh. Anyway, he couldn't afford. You know, he is under a lot of pressure for the royal pennies. And, well, let's face it, you know, a second son, a spare. You know, you can't be spending that sort of money. I mean, yes, Prince Andrew lives in Royal Lodge, which is a great big 6,000 room mansion, but that's Prince Andrew. That's a different affair. Different time. Harry stewed. He stewed like a pot that never boils on the run up to the wedding. Couldn't believe this slight. Catherine was demanding apologies over the baby brain affair. And of course there was the incident of the bridesmaid dress. And William and Catherine were noticing that Harry was permanently on edge. And their entourage also noticed that he was petulant and short-tempered. So it's petulant and short-tempered. Well as his own ginger fieriness, which can be a wonderful attribute in many people. This petulance and this short-tempered, we've spoken about this before, it is absolutely indicative of a personality that is, sorry to say to all of you who love to have an old puff of the old greed or the old weed or the old walkie-barky, it is very... I was a bit reticent to broach that topic on one of my previous broadcasts because I said, in my experience, people that do that long term, they all end up paranoid with their brain cells frying. It's very few people that do it regularly that get away scot-free long term. I realise it has wonderful effects, especially for those people that are in pain. I can totally understand why they turn to it. I certainly can. And I was quite relieved going over the comments after that particular broadcast when hundreds of you, so many comments from you, and I thank you for them, saying that either you'd had experience, but moreover, usually family members that you know of. And some had even resulted in very sad stories, which you were kind enough to share with me, resulting in deaths, suicides, illnesses, all from what's seen as a rather harmless recreational drug. Cannabis, basically, marijuana, this kind of thing. So it wasn't just going on in my own mind. I saw for myself that it's a real thing that can have dreadful implications. And one of those symptoms as well of a regular user is the fact that they're oh so chilled and oh so warm and seemingly coherent sometimes, but then when they haven't had it for a while and they need it and they're stressed, petulance, short-tempered, frustration, anger issues, deep anger issues, and Harry is the one who's painted this picture himself by sharing all the information with us that he has. So we'll return to that story as and when more revelations come out this weekend, because it continues to be serialized. Thanks for joining me. I look forward to seeing you in the next broadcast. Leave me a juicy comment, and if you'd like to treat me to an Easter goodie, my privy purse is in the description box, and I thank you most sincerely. I really do. Take care, enjoy the rest of the weekend, and I'll catch up with you soon, my dear. Stay royal and toodle pip.